At the age of 11, England's school children are among the most literate and numerate in the world. By 16, many of them quit education disillusioned and underprepared for adult life. The government claims it's tackling the issue, but how can teachers win the hearts and minds of secondary pupils who seem to have lost the love of learning? That's the question in this big debate. Hello and welcome to the big debate. Dull, boring, irrelevant. These are the kind of words often used by English 16-year-olds when asked what they think of school. It's a pretty damning indictment of 11 years of compulsory education. And the evidence seems to suggest that their disenchantment begins with the transition to secondary school. At the age of 11, the majority of England's school children are bright, high achievers. Yet, by 16, the picture changes dramatically. In 2006, no less than 55% of students failed to secure A to C grades in 5 GCSEs, if that is you include maths and English. Around 10% of pupils quit school altogether. England's staying on rates are among the lowest in Europe. So what's going on? Why do so many children seem to lose the plot between 11 and 16? And why can't teachers do more to help? Critics argue that one thing above all else is to blame: too much testing. The education system, they claim, has become obsessed with performance targets and league tables, both measured by national test results. Furthermore, with so much emphasis on achieving good results in the core subjects, many fear the teaching of history, geography, foreign languages, let alone music and art, goes by the board. What should be a tool to measure children's educational performance, say the critics, has now hijacked the educational process. The government's responding to such concerns with a raft of pilot schemes and initiatives based around various forms of personalised learning. But with testing and league tables still in place, will any of it work? Now, joining me to discuss these things, a distinguished panel and a no less distinguished audience that's going to very much participate in this discussion. Welcome to you all. Simple question to you first, John Bangs. Testing, good, bad, or somewhere in between, as it is now?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the abstract notion of testing. In fact, testing is an integral part of life. In a sense, it's about assessment, finding out where the child needs to go. That's very much a personal thing between teacher and pupil, and it really is an essential part of learning. The problem we've got with testing in England, particularly, and not in Wales, not in Scotland, not in Northern Ireland, is what's called high-stakes tests. That you fail those tests, in inverted commas, there are going to be consequences for the student, for the teacher, and for the school itself. So in a sense, what the government has done is use the testing system to make it its accountability system. And in a sense, for government, it is the only way, or one of the few ways, it can measure the quality of the school. Now, what teachers say is that's completely irrelevant. Testing shouldn't be about that.
We'll pursue that, of course. Dylan William, what's your perspective on this?
I think the real problem is that what we test is too narrow. And that's created an incentive for teachers and for students to work on very narrowed aspects of the curriculum. We only work really hard in primary schools on maths, English and science, because those are tested, and we only work on particular aspects of those subjects, the ones that are easily tested in the tests. So we've seen a narrowing of the curriculum, we've seen a narrowing of attention onto specific students. So students who are close to some arbitrary benchmark get extra attention, and it's all about getting the highest scores. It's not about promoting the maximum student learning.
Peter Walker, sounds a sort of simple question. Who are the tests designed for? Students, schools, parents, government? Who?
I think the challenge for us all tonight is to work out how we would have a national system of accountability. I think we're trying something very ambitious in this country with the national testing system. Sure, there's things wrong with it, but actually, as a recent head teacher, when I was confronted on open evenings with parents who had a list of the local schools and were very keen to know how their pupils would do in my school, and it was a particularly challenging school, you know, parents are looking for some sort of measure of accountability. And one of the interesting things about the flip side of the testing, which is the assessment for learning, which I'm sure we'll come to later, is how challenging we've found over 20 years to create a system that sticks and we can actually roll out across the country so that every child gets an entitlement.
And you've used accountability in a positive way. We heard it used in a slightly less positive way before. Ken Boston, you have put your head from your esteemed position somewhat above the parapet to float a more flexible testing system. One or two people have taken pot shots at you. Can you just say, first of all, the extent to which you don't think the present system is doing the best by students, parents and a society that wants to be accounted to?
I think the issue is that there are various purposes of assessment, and we're trying to use one form of assessment, which is essentially a summative assessment, for a number of purposes. I think there's nothing wrong with an assessment which is purely summative. I agree with the notion of accountability and for us being accountable at school and system national level for the learning which is taking place. But I think the real difficulty is that we then take what is an entirely summative test, use it for a range of other purposes, summing up the state of the nation's learning or the state of the school's attainment, and use it for a range of other purposes. Assessment essentially must be fit for purpose. I don't think there is too much testing. I think there is too much testing being used for purposes for which it is not designed.
You say that it has different purposes. Accountability is one of those purposes.
Absolutely. I think that we must have national accountability for educational performance, but whether that is best delivered by full cohort testing is another question.
You've floated the idea, as I touched on, of selected cohorts, small groups of pupils who take the tests, as it were, representing their peers. How does that? How do you see that working?
Well, that was floated within the context of the current consultation paper, Making Good Progress.
Yeah.
And in it, there is it envisages that progress tests might, at some stage in the future, even replace national curriculum tests. People ask me how that might be done, and I said, well, if we got to that position, it might well be done by taking, say, 3% of the population, the student population, statistically valid sample, and every year giving them exactly the same test.
John Bangs, appeal to you. I mean, let some of your less driven, less motivated teachers off something of a hook, wouldn't it?
I don't think so. And in fact, actually, the argument for a central bank of teacher-developed tests, which they can draw down for use when they believe the child is ready to move on to the next level or the next stage, actually has a long and honourable history. The issue, however, is, and unfortunately with this new government document, Making Good Progress, I'm afraid it hasn't tackled it, is do you have the current baggage, the current framework of test targets and tables as well, accompanying what is potentially, and I agree with Ken, a revolutionary approach to assessment in this country. Unfortunately, the government has decided to maintain its framework of test targets and tables alongside the experiment that Ken describes.
Peter Walker, on that.
Yes, I think there is actually, we should highlight something else that's going on, which John's just referred to, which is this progression pilot. Because I was interested in your introduction because it painted a remarkably negative picture of secondary schooling. And I think we need to recognise that while the testing regime has been in place, our society has changed quite radically, and the young people that come together in the secondary years have a very different life experience from what they had 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you look at new technology and so on. So one of the things I think we need to address in the context of testing is how we measure performance over the course of years 7, 8 and 9, the first 3 years of secondary schooling. And I think John's right, there's still more to explore around the progression pilot, but the concept that the government is now exploring, that we don't necessarily have a one-time assessment of every 14-year-old.
But you're not giving him any comfort that that you would want the government or would hope that the government would reduce the number of tests, are you? Or the range of tests as they are. In an odd way, you'll be sort of adding to them, however, in whatever sophisticated a fashion. Is that right?
I think it needs to be explored how it happens, because...
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not clear. You see, for example, if a child reaches a certain level at a certain year in his or her time in school, does he or she automatically go on to the next level and take a test the next year, or is that time used to do something else? QCA are currently launching a review of the Key Stage 3 curriculum. One of the aims of that, apart from raising standards in English and maths, is to create greater flexibility in the curriculum to allow young people to undertake other forms of activity in their learning, which is something that teachers, I think, would welcome.
Don, do you want to...
Well, but to pick on Ken's point, I think that my worry about the light sampling is that what we know is that the more the test results matter to the students, the better they do. And it's very difficult to motivate students with those light sampling techniques if the results don't matter to them personally. And so the government would get misleading information about the real standard of student achievement. The second problem with moving towards greater teacher assessment, and this is evidenced by what happens in America, is that students do a lot of tasks that are then assessed by their teacher, and they get a grade for that task. They then keep the grade whether they subsequently forget everything they ever knew or not. And so what you see is teachers focusing on the lowest common denominator of getting through a curriculum at a very shallow level, testing the students every 2 or 3 weeks, capturing that mark, and then the problem is that what gets accumulated over a year is actually very, very slight.
OK, let's just hold it there and pick up on one of the things that we were hearing, particularly from John. Teachers often complain about the burden of testing. So let's take a look now at what it means, or can mean, in practice. In some schools, preparations for SATs involve a battery of approaches which begin even before pupils join the school.
To find out how teachers can help children succeed at Key Stage 3, we've come to Bridgewater in Somerset.
We've got very, very successful focused teaching in English, maths and science. This is because we analyse the results that they get from their Key Stage 2 exams just before they leave primary school, so we know their strengths and weaknesses from those. And we also get the students to take what's called a CAT test, a cognitive assessment test.
A number of schools are beginning to introduce some form of cognitive reasoning test at the beginning of Year 7. What's interesting about East Bridgewater is when they do them.
What we do is we actually get the students to come in to our school whilst they're still at primary school, so that these tests are taken in June or July, and that when the students arrive in September, we already have that information along with their Key Stage 2 results.
Year 7 students at the Robert Blake Science College do CATs too, but the school has gone further. A member of the science department, Julie Cadmore, is putting her Year 8 group through a science reasoning task.
During the year, they are given tests throughout the year. We keep that as a spreadsheet, so we're constantly looking at where a youngster is going. But also, very importantly, at the beginning of each academic year, the youngsters do the science reasoning task, so we know where their cognitive ability is.
It's a cold December day, and science teacher Liz Waterman is preparing to run a revision lesson. But it's not an ordinary lesson, because it isn't for just her Year 9 students, it's for their parents as well.
I want to thank you for coming, and I hope this evening is going to be useful. The main purpose of this meeting is that it's going to give the kids here some idea of how to tackle big revision tasks, and from the point of view of parents, some idea of what they should be doing, how you can help them do it, and a way for you to make sure it's actually happening. Now, what I want you to do is to have a go at something. Mums and dads as well. You're asking children to go from learning little bits of information, small packages, to now you've got to get your head around doing a large amount of prolonged revision. And I don't think they know how to manage it unless it's formalised. From my revision book, it's page 4. I might put the 4 over here. I think that way I'll know I've done that page. It's giving the children and the parents the tools they need to know how to make the most of the time they've got and do the things that will have an impact.
Secondary schools in Somerset fighting to get those SATs. On the face of it, it's very motivated, very driven, but Paula Badger, you are a teacher. Are SATs, in your view, Key Stage 3, for instance, in your view, compatible with encouraging a child to have a love of learning?
Yes, I think they are. I'm ahead of Year 9 as well at our school, and I found that it's been, initially when the SATs came in, I wasn't in great favour of them, but I'm a convert. I think that it helps inform conversations with students and with parents, and certainly our students have been doing mock SATs recently, and they're looking at all sorts of assessment, looking at how they can improve, so they're looking at the formative assessment as well. And I think it's informed a lot of our discussions with parents, talking about whether their child is achieving or not, because you can underachieve at various different levels.
Andrew Burton, you're, as it were, her boss, your head teacher, am I right? the school.
Head teacher.
So is she on message when she's saying that?
I think so. I think that summative assessment is critical to understanding where a child is and where they need to go. And it gives you a baseline, an idea. You know, in the past you may have had a conversation, well, as a child submitted a piece of work, is it a good piece of work? Well, I don't know, because I might not know what their baseline ability is.
Gordon Stobart.
My concern is when you get into this kind of test-taking technique practice, whether it's past its sell-by date in terms of are we actually helping the learning process, or are we just drilling kids to do well on tests? And the concern is it about learning or is it about results? And the two aren't necessarily the same.
Peter Walker, would you subscribe to what you saw there as being something that's perfectly appropriate?
Yes, I think it is appropriate, and I think what we saw there was some motivated students. I think one of the interesting issues for us in the country at the moment is the issue of equity. Whatever system we have, certain groups of young people do quite well by it and certain groups of young people don't. And when you see young people, as I've seen repeatedly, who find literacy very challenging, actually being able to adopt techniques in an examination room that they couldn't previously adopt, you know you're giving them skills for life, you know you're giving them strategies to cope with some of the challenging tests that they will have to pass as they move through schooling and through learning and through life. And I think that's a key equity issue for us. And I think we saw some good examples, actually. Certainly the involvement of parents in that working very well in that school.
Anyone want to come in on that? Yes, just there. Nick Grant.
Thanks. The prime purpose of testing is to provide the league tables and to achieve a competition which the government calls diversity and choice, but I think that's a wholly negative way forward. The kind of problem I find as an expressive arts teacher is that by secondary school, the SATs have had such a numbing effect on students in terms of their potential for creativity, and their whole attitude to teaching is what I call instrumental. They will only listen to or take any teaching as long as they know it's going to help them get through whatever the next hurdle is. And as an expressive arts teacher, I'm looking for initiative, spark, a bit of cheek even, a contribution by the student to their own learning, which has been drilled out of them during primary school, largely because of SATs.
Yes.
I must strongly disagree with that. Indeed, there's a head teacher in the audience whose school I've recently visited who's got some quite remarkable creative artwork in his school. And we could go now to many schools across the land where there were great examples of creative learning taking place.
The head has put up his hand. Yeah. Graham's Hollingshead, yeah?
Yeah. We had a recent Ofsted inspection in November, and the curriculum that we put on at Key Stage 4 was described as outstanding because of the creative and vocational nature and context that we have. The issue we were given with Ofsted was to make the Key Stage 3 curriculum more creative than it actually was, because we have stuck with the traditional broad balanced curriculum focusing on most of the national curriculum core and foundation subjects.
And you can deliver the core effectively grades once you get to GCSE.
I think so. I would disagree with what he says. To me, the essence of good quality education is good teaching in the classroom. It's good teachers and effective learning that makes learning fun for the pupils.
John Banks.
Well, I mean, I'd agree with that, but I don't think you were disagreeing with the previous contributor, because I think that's what he was saying as well.
He was saying quite clearly that he can deliver SATs and he can deliver creative, imaginative teaching.
Yeah, and I tell you what, actually, it is a constant source of amazement to me the way in which schools can get hold of any government initiative and make them unrecognisable. The point I'm making is they shouldn't have to. Actually, what they should have to do is to pick up with an assessment system which actually yields knowledge about children's learning, and also have a fair national system of accountability and evaluation, which is based very much on the idea of system sampling. And we used to have that about 10 years ago. It's called the Assessment Performance Unit. Actually, more than that, about 20 years ago. Yes, thanks, Dylan. And actually, there is an argument to say to government, think about what you want from the system. You have a right to know how it's performing, use sampling, find out how the system's performing that way, and then have a look at how you develop assessment in terms of encouraging learning.
If you take for a moment still the present system that you as heads are required to deliver, or those of you who are heads. You were a head, Richard Fawcett. Isn't there a temptation? We've heard rather competing views about whether you can deliver more than simply the narrow curriculum. Is there not a temptation on heads to, in inverted commas I put the word, bully their teachers into delivering the narrow curriculum so that at the end they can point to their test results and say, we are doing very well, thank you. And if things go by the board as a consequence of that, so be it.
I think the problem is that the tests have actually assumed an importance which they probably ought not to have. What has happened is we have so much testing. I would ask you, is it really that important? Now, how many people go to employment and get asked about their Key Stage 3 results, for example? I should think nobody has in the country. I'd be very surprised.
What about the argument from accountability, which Peter puts, that, namely, we need to know as a society?
But that can be accomplished through that which Ken Boston was suggesting, by having a sampling process rather than everybody taking the test at a particular time. That's a classic example of where it fulfills one function, which one would agree there needs to be accountability, but doesn't fulfil it for the individual. And I have to say to you, it's regrettable when you hear a colleague head teacher in a challenging school finding that there are young girls having problems like anorexia, which are attributed medically to the whole business of preparing for tests. Now, that sort of thing shouldn't be happening.
Let me bring in Linda Blair here, because you're a psychologist. Is there evidence, not so much that pupils are put under some degree of stress or pressure, but that there is a significant number who are put under an unacceptable or damaging degree of pressure through the SAT system?
I think so. I mean, I've certainly seen it both in my clinic and when I go around and talk to them about study techniques. It's really increased over the last 25 years.
How does it manifest itself?
Well, anorexia is one example.
Is there a degree to which this pressure adversely affects people more if they are not so bright, not so intellectually gifted?
No.
Or does it go across the board?
It goes across the board, and I think probably the more gifted you are, the more you feel the pressure. I think it goes across the board, really.
Yes, just behind you with the T-shirt on.
I agree with that comment there. The more gifted you are, I don't think that you feel more pressure.
Don't you?
No, because I know it's going to sound really stupid, but I'm not at all intelligent in the way academically that people would like, and I was under so much pressure to perform at school, and people who are really intelligent, say for a lass that I know called Freya, she was so intelligent compared to me, and she basically didn't have to do any of the work that I had to do. I had to do like 3 or 4 of the amount of work she had to do just to pass my results, which I never did. I never passed my results because I was under so much pressure. And she wasn't, and she got an A.
Well, I think that shows it goes across the
But
board.
what makes you unintelligent? That's the bit I don't understand. You're able to come on this programme and express yourself, but you're also saying you're unintelligent. Who told you that?
I'm not saying that I'm unintelligent. I'm saying I'm not as intelligent as people would like in the academic world, as you say.
Absolutely, yes.
Because
that's the point.
You know
that's
what I mean?
the point.
Okay, yes.
One last point. There's a tragic assumption underlying all this, which is that teaching to the test is the best way to raise your test scores. And that's not true. What we've seen is when teachers teach for deep understanding, then students actually get the test scores and they actually enjoy their learning far more.
But they're bound to teach for the test if there's pressures on them to
No,
deliver.
what we have found is that when teachers teach for deep understanding, they actually raise their test scores by more than teaching to the test.
But so therefore, in a sense, unless I misunderstand you, that you can have SATs for the purposes of accountability, if you leaving aside the question of stress, which is one question, of course, which was raised, you can have that, and at the same time you can teach well.
I think that's right. I think the tragedy is that people have interpreted what they need to do as dumbing down the curriculum and focusing on teaching to the test, when in fact it's not necessary.
We're going to just pause there for a second. Of course, results in SATs exams feed into the league tables. If we were to abandon national testing at Key Stage 3, does that mean that league tables would have to go as well? Hypothetical question at the moment, and more on that in a moment. Hello and welcome back to the big debate. Our subject, the pressure of testing in secondary schools. The charge being that SATs are distorting the educational process. Teachers, it said, are driven to focus too much on test results as a way of boosting their school's league table place. So, league tables. John Bangs, your position representing teachers is well known. You'd like to do away with them altogether. This is a nice little stick with which to beat them, isn't it?
Yes, it's an extraordinary process every year. You get the league tables coming out. The government denies it has any hand in them because it says the Press Association constructs them and it's all to do with the press. And then we've got the classic press hunt for the outliers, the worst school in England, or the best school in England. And in the middle, you've got various people looking and opening the newspaper and having a look to see where their school is. Actually, as a picture of where schools as corporate institutions are, it's a very bad way of describing it.
OK. Graham Hollingshead, you at your school have, on the face of it, rather perplexing outcomes. You do, according to one league table, you do fantastically, and according to another, you're a disaster.
Yeah, in Oldham, for instance, we're third in terms of what are classed as 5 good GCSEs. But then if you take a look at the 5 A star to C, including English and Maths, we drop, if that's the word, to the bottom. And then if you look at the CVA, the contextual value added, which is from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 4, we're actually top. So it depends which table you read and which table you want to believe.
Ken Boston, it's a bit of a bugger's muddle, that sort of version, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I would agree that the key is a host of information on the various facets and dimensions of a school rather than simply ranking them by one criterion.
And again, who are they for the parent to be able to judge, assuming that there are places at the schools available, which school is most suited to their child? Is that the principal purpose, or is it so that the Department of Education can say things are going well here and not so well there?
I think both purposes are important. One is surely to allow the parent to have some idea of the school that might best suit his or her child. But I think also the department, if it is to allocate resources and devise strategies to improve performance overall, must be able to identify where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are.
Richard Arrowsmith, at the back top there, you actually resigned your post as a head teacher because you so strongly objected to testing. Yes. Does it follow from that you also object to league tables?
Yes, very strongly, along with almost every other school that I know, actually. I think for years government has been getting the message very, very clearly that league tables are not acceptable means of judging schools. They are actually worse. They're misinformation because the number of parents who can come and make an intelligent comment about what they say about your school is very, very few.
The important thing is this. If you want to know how good a school is at attracting smart kids to come through its doors, then you should look at the raw results. If you want to know how good the school is at teaching students something, you should look at the contextual value added. That explains the differences in scores that we often see. Schools that get high raw result scores and low contextual value added are not good schools. They just happen to be in the right place to attract the smart kids at the right time.
Ashtil Eni, at the back there, you're a parent governor?
I'm a foundation governor, but I am a parent of the school.
Are league tables important to you and your fellow parents?
Yes, to me, league tables are important. However, they're important because obviously you want to have some criteria by which you can judge whether a school is a good school or not, and whether it's the type of school that you would like your child to go to. However, it may be that the criteria for compiling the what goes into the league, as it were, to what goes into the table, is probably too narrow, because, in my view, that education is more than just academic matters. It comprises more things, as the panel have been, and I think most people in the audience as well have been saying.
Ken Boston, as a matter of fact, one way or another, you can shift arguments forward and change arguments in relation to testing and how testing should be developed, evolve. But the league tables, in one form or another, are here to stay, are they not? That's a political fact of the world.
Well, I can't answer for the government, of course.
Well,
but,
this is an opinion that you're being invited to have, and you're not exactly short of them.
Well, I think they probably are here to stay, but what I would like to see is that we make them better, in that we provide far more information about information which is useful to parents.
And John Bangs, you are against them, at least as they are. Why shouldn't parents, why shouldn't society at large, that puts into education billions of pounds, say, yes, you teachers and those who run schools are quite properly accountable, and the league tables are the best means of allowing us, the public, the taxpayers, to know that you are or aren't delivering?
Well, are the worst means of doing that. I don't think anyone's arguing against public accountability. And in fact, actually, you have developing systems in other countries, particularly Finland, where you have school self-evaluation that's moderated externally, and that you're testing how well teachers and the school community is evaluating itself. It works and it's effective. And I'd like to chuck something else in. I think we are seeing a major failure of political nerve by this government. All the other countries in the United Kingdom do not have school performance tables. Denmark has abolished them. And I think what the government has got to do, and all the 6 teacher organisations have jointly come behind a statement on this, is actually evaluate and review the summative assessment system for accountability purposes. That's the job the government has to do.
Failure of nerve, Peter.
Well, I think actually we're seeing the start of a transformation of secondary education, because we've got the Key Stage 3 review, we've got 14 to 19 significant changes coming. We've seen that we now have different models of measuring accountability in terms of the league tables, CVA and raw scores. I think we're starting down a road that will see us actually change how we make schools accountable over the next few years. And John's reference to self-evaluation is another strand in the way the Ofsted process is changing at the moment. So there are things moving in the system, I think.
Tectonic plates, as they say.
Yeah.
To take a pause there and, as it were, park the issue of national assessments and go on with this debate over national testing, which is already opening the door to other ways, as we've touched on, assessing children's progress. Chief among these alternatives is formative assessment, and it involves teachers adopting really quite different strategies in the classroom. Let's now take a look at formative assessment in action in 2 different schools, one near Oxford, one near Leeds.
Schools across the country are facing the challenge of finding effective ways to assess the progress of their students. At Lord William's School in Oxfordshire, science teacher John Ryder uses open questioning to stimulate discussion amongst pupils in his Year 11 class.
I think if I just do quick question answer, they don't have the time to think and they don't process information. They also have to take a risk in terms of peer pressure in answering a question, putting their hand up and answering a question. And if they know that in their group they've shared the ideas and they've got something to say, then they're much more confident to do that.
Do you reckon you should just bungle on one country? I don't know. Or try and mingle?
Mingle. And I think here, every kid has actually engaged with the task and they've talked to each other about it, and I hope they know the structure of the discussion that's coming, and so they know they're going to have to listen to each other in the discussion that follows.
Karen Veer has been developing a comment-only approach to marking mathematics. Why does she think this is important?
I think the benefits for me of comment marking is the interaction with the child. Actually getting the child to reply to my comment, let me know that they've understood it by doing the thing that I've asked them to do. And then having a look when I next mark the book at what they put into my last comment. It's much more rewarding than just thinking, oh, they got 73 out of 86. I mean, that's very, it doesn't mean much to us.
Peer assessment is an important part of assessment for learning and seen as a vital skill for enabling pupils to take control of their own learning. One school that's developed strategies to promote and support peer assessment is Specialist Language College, Prince Henry's Grammar School.
And what we wanted to do today was to get them to look at a model text, if you like, a good piece of work which had been produced by 2 students in the group, and to analyse what made it a good text, for them to be able to identify the characteristics of a good piece of writing, so that they in their own writing could then use some of those features to improve the quality.
Lo importante es estudiar las características
interesantes de este texto. They could see very clearly that this piece of work was very rich in narration and descriptions and so on, because they had very vividly in front of them, colour-coded, lots of opinions, lots of adjectives, lots of verbs and so on. So it was a very visual way, I suppose, of getting them to see the quality piece of work that they are capable of, because after all, it wasn't my work, it was the work of one of their peers, and therefore something which they can aspire to.
Narrates events, gives full descriptions, and they've said like the reasons why they thought that she was pretty and things like that. So I'd give it generally 6 for complexity and 8 for communication as well.
I can see that the quality of their work is improving, and the sort of coursework that they're producing now is better on that basis than it was earlier in the year, because they're using these techniques and they're much more aware now of what constitutes a good piece of work, a quality piece of work.
In that example, at least, we see formative assessment being a matter of teachers, to an extent, taking a back seat while the pupils evaluate each other's work. That's obviously only part of it, Dylan William, but it's a very, very different approach, isn't it?
It is, but the point is that traditional assessments, we've only looked backwards. We've looked backwards at what the students have done. With formative assessment, the key idea is that you look forward. So out of a piece of work, the question is not how good is it now, the question is what needs to happen for it to be even better and for the student to learn from that process.
Does 73 out of 86, or whatever the figure is, as that teacher in the piece said, mean nothing to us? I would have thought it means quite a lot to most people. 73 as opposed to 43, pass as opposed to fail.
Well, 73 depends on how hard the test was. 73 out of 86 on one test could be a lot worse score than 46 out of 200 on a different test. The problem is that these scores are actually meaningless. Grades are actually meaningless for the students. And more importantly, just telling a student where they are in their learning doesn't actually tell them what they need to do to improve. And the essence of feedback, the original engineering idea of feedback, is that feedback contains within it a recipe for where you need to go next.
Jake Baldini, what did you make of it?
I agree with you in what you said. The teacher takes a back seat, because with that maths teacher, if a teacher wrote a comment in my book, it'd be like, all right, so you have no time to talk to me about it. You just want to sit me down and you want me to write a comment back to you. Why can't I come up to you and say, I thought your comment was unjustified because I spent 3 hours doing this homework for you. So why are you just giving me a comment and a mark? I want some more interaction with you. And the peer learning, I don't agree with that either. I don't want to be taught by my mates, because when you go outside, if you get something wrong, your mates are going to be there for the rest of the day to take the mick. The teacher isn't, because that's what the teacher isn't there for.
At best, Dylan, the critique very eloquently put there is that it's a sort of whimsy.
Well, I mean, I think that the comments that we saw Karen Veer putting on the children's work were not those kinds of comments. I mean, they were constructive comments, not about how well it was. And there wasn't a mark.
Take the time to talk to the children anymore.
But no, she does. I mean, she talks to the students all the time. But the point is that by having time to sit down and think carefully about what she needs to focus the student's work on, then the student can respond. And that dialogue can be in addition to dialogue in the classroom. The important point is she doesn't put a mark on, because the mark deflects attention away from the comment. And what we discovered through quite extensive research is if you put a comment and a mark side by side, the students look at the mark and not the comment. The first thing they look at is the mark. The second thing they look at is their neighbour's mark.
Peter Walker.
Yes, I wanted to take issue with what you said earlier, Jonathan, because far from being a soft option, that's actually quite a challenging approach for the teacher, and it needs very careful planning.
I said it's soft option for the weak teacher because they opt out of it, and
I
not
don't
for
think
the best.
I don't think it
for
is.
no one.
I don't think it is, and I think going back to your introduction with this challenge about the state of secondary education, I mean, one of the key areas of work for the strategies is assessment for learning at the moment, and I think there's a there's a gem in this that we need to grasp, because we really need to give young people during 11 to 19 phase control of their learning, but we need to do it, as Ken says, in structured ways where the teacher is framing the work.
Anyone? Yes. Anyone who hasn't been in yet on this who wants to come in? Yes, down here at the front. Ruth Sutton.
Yes, that's right. What we're looking at in assessment for learning is that by engaging the kids, by making them think more, by making them more independent, by whatever strategies that we've seen, and there are plenty of others, you're actually going to raise the capacity of those kids not only to be longer learners, but to do better on the next test as well.
Does it? You're a teacher.
I used to be.
Does it depend, perhaps I'd ask you then, does it depend upon, because it is so very different, it feels much more like a tutorial to observe, on there being small groups which would dramatically shift the national teacher training, the teacher-pupil ratio?
No, we've seen it working very effectively in classes of 40. But the trap that we've got into particularly in our testing and accountability culture, is that teachers create learning. And teachers do not create learning. Only learners create learning. And it's the engagement that Ruth talked about that you get in these kinds of classrooms where the teacher is orchestrating the discussion, and it's actually very expert performance. It doesn't look like it because we just see the students having a good discussion.
OK, going to move on again, because whether assessment is continuous or done through testing or a combination, it has one, of course, ultimate goal: to prepare secondary-age children at the moment for the greatest challenge of their school career, GCSEs. But if SATs are not a good way of assessing children's performance, how can GCSEs be any better? More on that in a moment. Welcome back to the big debate. In the spotlight, secondary testing and assessment. Even if schools could abandon SATs or adopt them or change to a continuous formative assessment system for 11 to 14-year-olds, there's no escape from one thing: GCSEs. Samia Mia, what were they like for you?
From my experience at school, everybody had quite difficult backgrounds and lives. And when it came to GCSEs, it seemed like we were being told, if you don't do well, your life is over. And a lot of the kids who messed around were walking around all of a sudden looking really depressed and really upset. And you knew that they were very, very stressed. And so was I. And it just felt like if you didn't do well, that you're going to go nowhere. And I think that's just a really, really bad way to approach GCSEs when it's supposed to be something to start your life, not end it.
That's very powerfully put. In your own case, what happened? Did OK?
No. Two of my main classes, maths and English, were modelled up 6 months before my exam. Our regular teachers were taken away, so I was completely alone. Revision isn't something I'm strong on, and I was going through a difficult time, and I just kind of blagged my way through the exams, and I'm really glad I came out with good results, but a lot of people didn't, and it's just not fair that we don't get the help we need.
Jake, judging from what you've already said, you're not exactly a fan of GCSEs.
Not particularly, mate. I was told in year 9, a year before you were even meant to start, that if I wanted to make anything of my life, because I'm not going to, that's what people told me, that if I wanted to make anything of my life, I need to change the way I learn. And it was like, there's no way you can tell me that I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do, just because I'm not going to do well on my GCSEs.
And what happened subsequently?
I failed.
And what happened after that?
I got a job. Well, I left school at the age of 14 or 15, but I went back to do my GCSEs. But I've had a job since I was 14, training to be a chef.
It's quite a significant Ken Boston indictment. Of course, not everyone feels like that, but the fact of the matter is that for a lot of people, doing well in GCSE is important. But my question to you is this. We know that 50% plus of those who take GCSE fail to get 5 grades within the A to C band, if you include inside that mathematics and English. Do you believe that a shift towards formative assessment would have a beneficial impact on what are, on the face of it, pretty dismal figures?
The GCSE itself may not be the best way to go, which is for all young people, which is why we are developing the Level 2 diploma, which will have a far richer vocationally based curriculum, not a training program, still an education program, still concerned essentially with cognitive development, but a program which is more likely to appeal to many of those students who are performing poorly at the moment.
Well, that's quite a big assumption, isn't it? Because there may be quite a lot of those who could, taught better in the ways that we've been exploring, tested more effectively, would find themselves able to be stimulated into doing much better at GCSE.
Yes, I think that's true. I think it is a matter of the quality of the teaching, but there is also a matter of the curriculum. To take just a very quick anecdotal example, I have had experience in the past with a group of 16-year-olds who completely failed at mathematics. They regarded themselves as failures. They were regarded by their school as failures. We taught them land surveying. By the end of the term, those youngsters were working at quite advanced trigonometry and had an understanding of space and dimension, which was in the mathematics curriculum. But if you'd told them that they'd spent a term doing maths, they would have denied it. They would have said they learned how to survey.
Well, you've taken me to, without knowing it, to exactly what I think we might now have a look at, because of this issue of motivation, which is absolutely central to what we're talking about. It's a big issue at GCSE. Let's have a look at how one maths teacher tries to put a bit of fun into Year 10 trigonometry. The aim to stimulate the class with practical fieldwork. But, which is interesting here, the teacher feels that the pupil's reluctance at taking something on new is quite significant, and he himself frets about the risk, as he puts it, of the children going off task.
Just get used to the equipment. When I presented them with what we were going to do in the lesson, I think they kind of went through the change curve, really. When anyone's presented with change, they kind of go through this anxiety, they start to worry, they don't know what's going to happen. So we've got 3 minutes now. So think about the 4 highest points around the school. When we talked through it, there was kind of this realisation, and then it kind of goes into acceptance and kind of more excitement, really, because they're not used to doing something different. So I am going to give you 20 minutes to get round your 4 sites and take all the details. So you've got to work fairly quickly and swiftly. OK, you need to go to your 4 sites. What's the element of control like? You know, they're going to be out of sight. But I felt that I would take the risk that if I gave them a time period that they had to do it, then they'd be focused. They'd have 5 minutes essentially for each object. You've got to have a right angle triangle, so the top of the building needs to be directly below to where you're measuring to. So you're going to have to do some estimation, are you not?
We enjoyed doing it, but at first we sort of misinterpreted the idea of a metre. We thought it was like that big, not like that big.
What's your third measurement you need to know?
The
thing at the...
There we go.
29.2.
We enjoyed it quite a lot more than lessons because it helps if you can visualise things instead of just having to look at a textbook, and it's a lot more enjoyable because we actually got out.
So what I want you to do now is, with your 4 buildings, I want you to work out the height of those buildings, OK?
Have you included the green roof?
Yeah. And then opposite over 22.1 metres. Multiply tan 25, 14.8.
14.8 equals 5.38.
That's a John's video.
So what are you doing?
Where's the highest?
It's
behind the roof.
32 degrees.
My personal belief is that if you structured the task correctly and you've given specific structure around it, such as time, then I think you've got a potential to succeed rather than a potential to fail. I think it was an exercise that enriched their trigonometry.
It was good to see things a bit more visually.
I think even I might have understood trigonometry if it had been taught like that when I was at school, an awful long time ago. But Dylan, what it suggests is, when you look at that, you see real engagement, is how, and I guess this is your perspective, how hidebound at the moment too much teaching is, because pupils, as they touched on, are frightened to go there, and teachers, for slightly different reasons, are also frightened to go there, but it both involves assessment.
Yes, and the scary thing is you have to make a leap of faith, as that teacher did, of taking a risk that actually the students' time would be well spent and the students would be cooperative, and that's a very scary thing to do. And it looks like you're spending time away from the curriculum when you could be ramming these facts down kids' throats. And yet, this is the old teacher-learner trap again. Teachers think that they have to be doing stuff for students to learn. And the best teachers don't necessarily try to do the learning for the learner. They try to put the learner in a situation where the learner does the learning for themselves, because that's the really deepest learning, and that's retained for much longer. So it's having the faith that this is the right way to go about it. And we've seen time and time again that when teachers use that kind of learning in a rigorous way, the students get higher test scores than when teachers teach to the test.
Samir, at the back there, would that have made a difference to your feelings about training to pass GCSE?
Well, in my school, a lot of the students had very low confidence because they were told from very early on in their secondary education that then they're not gonna pass and they're not gonna get the qualifications. And I think that's when you go wrong. So a lot of students just don't engage, even when there's a really good lesson going on, even when there's a speaker, even when there's an activity, because they think there's no point. What's the point of engaging in this lesson if I'm going to fail in the end, if I can't achieve?
Down here in the middle at the front, Prue Huddleston, you were nodding away at that.
Yes, well, absolutely, because for me, that lesson was well contextualised, and that's the thing that will turn people on. If you are helping students, as you say, to find out for themselves, but also contextualise, to make some sense of it. It's exactly what Ken said. This is the way that you can bring the learning alive, not by teaching some kind of rote way.
See that it has a purpose and a role.
Absolutely, yes, yes. So it must be well contextualised, and the content must be real and relevant and relate to what it is that the young people are trying to do.
Is that compatible, to go back to where we started and where we're continuing, with the SATs itself? If, as Dylan was suggesting, you can still have SATs in some way or another, but if you teach more effectively and more confidently, you can still give a good learning experience and an effective one.
Absolutely. Formative assessment is just good teaching. To paraphrase it, it is just good teaching.
Do you recognise, Peter Walker, that there is a really big problem here to overcome? Because those sort of examples are not, I hesitate, maybe wrong, are by far from being in the majority of cases.
Well, if I may say so, I think we're in danger of making some sweeping generalisations here and laying everything at the door of testing and assessment. I think what we heard from the two young people over there was examples of poor leadership in the school, poor support for young people, and probably some poor teaching. And we could go to lots of other examples where young people are supported in very different ways through their GCSE years, with teachers doing exactly what we saw on the video. And I think there are a lot of people who are actually, a lot of young people who are engaged with their learning, despite the system that we have, in ways such as that.
Yes, down here, first of all, Gordon Stobart, and then Jake wants in again.
I think the issue that's coming out of this is everybody's agreeing about good teaching and what it's like. The issue is about how much our current testing system inhibits teachers and robs them of the confidence, because they've got to get through the syllabus, and how we can pull back from this.
In the second row, Bill Hibbard.
Hiya. Parents don't want their children to go into school to become a management information resource. They want their children to go into school to learn. We've talked about accountability in this programme, and the accountability of all the teaching staff and all the teaching process seems to be at the expense of the learning of the child. The child is just a tool in this whole process. Parents don't want that.
Commodity. OK. One final thought, just from our panellists here. The elephant in this room is the fact that shortly pupils are going to not be able to leave school at 16, but in one form or another are going to have to stay on in education until the age of 18. Just round the quartet here, given the challenges, the difficulties that we've been discussing, what single thing is going to be important in encouraging young people to think, yeah, I don't want to, as Jake did, want to leave school at 14, 15. I want to stay on at school until I'm 18, or in some similar form of educational involvement. Dylan, what's the single most important thing?
Well, we have to take forward curriculum, pedagogy and assessment together. We have to have more relevant curriculum. We have to have pedagogy, the way that teachers teach, that engages all students. And we have to have assessment that actually meets students' learning needs rather than puts a label on their forehead.
John Bangs?
I think there's a huge cohort of youngsters, those not in education, training, employment, that need to be asked about what they would want to see that would keep them within education. And that can be the baseline for a radical revision of the curriculum.
Peter Walker?
I think engagement with their learning and the experience of some success in their learning. And I think we are at the start of changes to the secondary curriculum. If we manage it well, could give us that.
And Ken Boston, last word.
I'd agree with all of that, but workplace-based learning, I think, is the key to it. Part-time learning in the workplace.
Jake over there approved of that. The last word was Jake's clap to that. We've got to leave it there. To you all, to our panel and audience here, guests in this big debate, big thank you. Of course, as we've been exploring, the problem of how to teach our secondary school children remains pretty big. With the government pledged, as I've just mentioned, the school leaving age to 18 within 5 years, it's a problem that could become a crisis. And that is why it's going to be the issue we're going to be discussing in our next big debate. But for now, goodbye.